Well, welcome everyone to today's webinar titled Identifying and Addressing Business Deposit Challenges, a B2C Focus. This is Brian from Strategic Treasurer, and we're pleased you could join us as we discuss the challenges and solutions to collecting and depositing various forms of payment. Our speakers for today are Brian Bailey, President of Clip Money, and Craig Jeffrey, Founder and Managing Partner of Strategic Treasurer. Welcome, Brian and Craig, and I'll now turn the presentation over to you.
Thanks, Brian Weeks and Brian Bailey. It's good to present with you. This is our first webinar together, so thanks for joining this edition of the webinar series.
Thanks for having us, Craig. Really appreciate being here, and the audience and turnout looks fantastic. So looking forward to today.
It's an interesting topic, sometimes overlooked. And thank you everybody for attending and for identifying where you're coming from. It's very fun to see the geographic dispersion on the webinar for many of you who plug those things in. So again, thanks for coming. We got a fair amount to cover in the remaining 58 minutes, and we'll get through it all. It'll be excellent and fun. So let's go through what our agenda looks like today. On the screen, you can see the payment situation. So we're going to be focusing on the B2C world of payments, but I think as you as a listener probably think about business to business and business to consumer payments. On the business to consumer side, we think of things as in-person and remote. So there's several different options. We're going to focus more on the in-person B2C side. So that'll be the focus for what's the payment situation? How's that impacting businesses that have consumers and collect funds internally and in person? Then we'll touch on payment complexity. We have I think, an interesting matrix to help us organize thoughts, how we rank those, handling payments coming in person and remote across the board. So we'll spend some time on that. When we look at challenges and solutions, collecting and depositing payments, there's this balance between, if I'm selling, I want to be as easy to buy from as possible. So being flexible is a key driver, but I also need to be efficient. And some payment methods can be far less efficient than others, but we don't want to lose any sales. So how can we be flexible, efficient? And from a company perspective, if we're selling to consumers, how can we make sure there's a good user experience for the retailer, the organization, or the company collecting funds directly? And then where is cash today? This is an area I try to keep up on things, but I have, like most of you, probably the bias of our own experience and what we see. Like if I go to the grocery store, I don't really see too many people writing checks anymore. It's very rare. I don't carry cash around, so I think that's the be all and end all of what's happening. People aren't using cash; they're not using checks. It's pretty interesting to see what's going on. Checks are in this long glide path down over time. Cash has surprisingly gone up since pre-pandemic, and so there'll be some hopeful statistics to see what goes on there, and then how that feeds back into the business world. And lest I continue too long on our intro and outline, I'll just go through the business issues with cash. Cash is messy, it's dirty, it's costly. There's some risk associated with cash, right? That's easy to steal. And companies need access to their liquidity. And the whole process can be opaque. So how do we identify those issues, and how do some of those issues get solved? Will be kind of the backdrop for much of what we're talking about today. And then on the key takeaway side, we'll summarize some of those points about the trends, priorities, the requirements that organizations have, and also discuss an approach to solve these issues in this environment of being flexible, accepting different payment types in an efficient and controlled manner. So that's our start. That's what we're going to cover today. I know it was a long intro, but let's get to the B2C payments landscape. I'll start us off, and Brian, I'll invite you to fill it in and go into some more depth. On the business side, You may have customers that come into the store on the right-hand side or that are remote. On the remote side, maybe you have a portal, maybe they're calling in or using some telephonic method. Sometimes it's check or it's some type of ACH debit to an account if it's set up. There might be the use of a card or a gift card. Maybe there's some type of other electronic method that's being used to make a payment. And so this is generally done through through a website, a portal where people are making those decisions. And there's a whole world around remote payments. You certainly can't do cash remotely, but there's other methods and ways of digitizing things like checks or providing your card information on a remote basis. But there's a huge portion, the vast majority of transactions are done in person. Maybe I'll flip it over to you, Brian, to talk through the landscape and fill this in some more.
Yeah, I think, Craig, that's an excellent point. In today's Amazon world or order to your home, I think we get a little bit clouded with where the majority of payments are actually happening for the everyday consumer. Nearly 8 out of 10 payments today, 80%, still happen in person. And that's across this range of digital and cash and check options, which, if you think about it, is still a huge majority of payments. And I think as we've added new methods of payment, digital wallets have seen proliferation and innovation. All that's happening is there's more payments happening across a broader range of instruments. The average consumer last year in 2023, according to a recent Fed study, we all did about 46 payments on a monthly basis. That was up from 39 payments in 2022. So as we add instruments, we add more payments. But what do we do with some of those legacy payments that are, as you mentioned, slowly winding down? Check is the only instrument on this particular slide that actually experienced a year-on-year decline, which should tell us that the challenge for payment management is going to only continue to increase.
Now, the fact that there's more payment methods and more payments is an interesting trend. Yeah, so we are going to move to our first poll question on here, but I did want to just do a little bit of a background. Brian Weeks had introduced Brian, who's speaking here. I think it's always helpful to know who's speaking to you. I just want to give a little bit of overview on Clip Money. Just some background. Not everybody's familiar with Clip Money. It's been some time since I became introduced to Clip Money. They built and manage a non-bank network in North America to handle business cash deposits. So it's many times people think of banks or they think of armored car services, and this network allows business customers to deposit money to any commercial bank account through the shared network they have. There's over 3,000 deposit endpoints. Just encourage you to look on their website or to have a direct conversation with them to find out more. But you'll see, and after we talk, you'll now find and see their network locations in shopping malls or convenience retailers. And I think of them as they provide a full-on alternative to armored car services or employees making deposits at branches or drop boxes. And there's a whole suite of technology that sits around that. I know that's just a rough intro. There's quite a bit more that can be said, but it's just helpful to know that. And I think Strategic Treasure is a consulting firm, it's a research firm, and is a firm that provides content. So that's us speaking to you on these topics. So let's go to our first poll question. It's popped up on the screen, so you should be looking at it. There are 2 poll questions. It's a double stack, all for one low price. You got the top one is select all that apply, as is the bottom one. What do you believe are the most cost-effective and consumer-friendly payment methods? So as you think about it, what do you think are the most cost-effective ways? Go ahead and select all that apply, consumer-friendly and cost-effective. Go ahead and select those. And then the second question is, what are the main challenges you face with B2C payment management? Integration, processing delays, program costs, security concerns, employee onboarding, et cetera, all the way down to not applicable or I am unsure. So go ahead and select those and then hit submit. There's usually some message in the chat box that tells you how to find the poll question if it's not showing up. If your company blocks it, we're sorry about that, but we can't undo your IT's block if that's the case. So go ahead and submit those. I'll have a few commercial announcements. Yeah, so there's a couple links there to follow Clip Money and Strategic Treasure on LinkedIn. Please do that. That helps our marketing teams feel really, really happy when people stay connected there. So go ahead and do that after you've submitted the poll. If you would like to see the poll results, please type the word clip or Clip Money. We'll take poll as well, but clip or Clip Money in the chat box. And if we get, let's just say if we get 175 responses that say Clip Money, poll, we will go ahead. I see people typing in all kinds of places. It's great. So thank you for that. And Brian, I'm going to bring you back into this. The first one, the top one is, what do you think is the most cost effective? Number one is electronic ACH. Number two is credit card. And then we drop down to debit card and digital wallet. Those are the top ones. Check, cash, other ones. Your thoughts on the responses here, and any feedback?
I think it's a pretty smart audience. I think electronic is clearly the cost leader. Probably not the most accessible or flexible payment method, but certainly the cheapest. And I think they also got the laggard right with check. Check is typically a pretty high cost per transaction for business, bank, or wherever you are. I think the ones in the middle are interesting though, Craig. I think would love your feedback on this. I think, we often get into this discussion about cost per transaction, cash versus credit. And we love to say in our industry, in the cash industry, that our fees as a percentage of total cash deposited are a fraction of credit card fees for whether you're an acquirer or interchange rates, et cetera. I do think that's narrowing as the cost of cash increases. So I was surprised to see such a big gap between that, and would love your opinion on that topic as well.
Yeah, this is one of those areas where I have that bias of I dislike using cash, and so I always have to say, let's think about this rationally. And the use of cards. Same thing with cards. It's like, oh, they're expensive to accept. Okay, but you get your money right up front in certain cases. But if on a retail environment, you're always getting paid, as you deliver the goods or the services. So there's a trade-off for that. To the extent that cash can be accepted and you have ready availability to it and you have visibility to it, now you may even have faster availability than you have with card. And when you look at the cost metrics, it can vary significantly depending on how you handle that collection point. There's some methods that it's really expensive. Armored car can be effective at certain levels. At other areas, it becomes extremely expensive. And so, we try to stay up on what that looks like. And I'm not as against cash as my mind makes me think when I look at the cost figures there, especially with some of the new innovation that's happened. You have any further thoughts on that too?
Yeah, I just think my attitude here is the growth engine of payments will be cards and digital, right? So how do we enable as an industry businesses to invest in those growth channels while managing cost for those instruments that will not be growing as fast, mainly check and cash? So I think it fits what we'll talk about for the rest of this presentation, but we do need to get after that cost curve of these paper-based legacy payment methods.
Yeah, right. It's you can't just exclude them, right? We tend to add more optionality, more complexity over time. The second question was, what are the main challenges you face? I think all the attenders can see that. Any thoughts? Last one is other, which is not defined, of course. The two low ones are employee onboarding, and then the top issue is integration with current systems, followed by about half on security concerns and loss prevention. Any of your thoughts on that?
Well, I think risk and security, both for employee as well as for the enterprise, is going to remain a top concern. So, and that's across all payment methods. And then I think just this concept that every payment instrument we talk about has its own infrastructure, if you will. So how does it fit within a business's point of sale, back office, accounting, and reconciliation? requires investment, and that investment is not necessarily customer facing, but it's required to run the business. So I think those are two top of mind issues we run into regularly in the cash space as well.
Excellent. Thanks for your comments. Thanks everybody for responding. Really appreciate that. I promised some information about a chart or a matrix to look at forms of payment. And Brian, if you want to start us off in there, I may throw a few comments in after you're done too.
Yeah, I think, Craig, we could spend the rest of the day on this one, but we won't. But I do think it's a really interesting way to think about the forms of payments we just talked about across a spectrum of variables that businesses need to think about. I think often we talk about consumer experience around payments. What this particular chart is how a business thinks about payments and the different trade-offs between them. I think we had a really good discussion there about cost between sort of the new digital and card-based payments versus legacy cash and check. But again, those costs are, again, quite complicated sometimes to come up with. Each of these trade-offs mean very different things depending on who your business is. Are you a small business who is very focused on liquidity, immediacy of cash to run your business in the most profitable way? Or many times what we find with enterprise businesses is with these large sprawling enterprises of stores, how do they create better transparency and visibility of transactions and payments in a way that allows them to reinforce their risk and loss prevention protocols, while also closing their books and reconciling their books in a timely manner? So these are all different variables that mean a lot of different things for businesses. I think the point I made a few minutes ago about each of these instruments requires its own administration. It requires the ability to train your operations staff on how to administer card versus cash versus other payments. It requires back office accounting, integration and reconciliation. How do these different instruments help you close books on a regular basis? And of course, from a finance perspective and a customer experience perspective, how does your staff get trained operationally to deal with this? So this is a matrix that we think is quite interesting to debate in terms of where are the priorities of your organization, and then how do we start to create better management methods for instance, cash, when it's an instrument that's not growing as quickly and really has not seen the innovation as the right side of this chart. There's been a ton of innovation coming to us from cards to digital. We're now talking about P2P payments, or digital payments, pay by bank, which is becoming more proliferate. So we do think that the left side of this chart, specifically cash, is due for some innovation that the rest of it has.
Yeah, thanks. One of the items as we were talking through this chart, prior to the webinar was, visibility and experience. What's the experience of the user who's making payments? If I have cash, I have card, I have check, I have some type of electronic method. That's one aspect. The other is what's the experience of the company or organization that's taking payments, and that becomes a bigger issue. If you take one type of payment in one environment, it's pretty easy. The complexity level's simple. It's 1 times 1. Your point of sale system, one method of collecting. Now that you have more, it's harder to train, it's harder to track. And so how are these user experience for the selling entity changing? And I think, like what you said, Brian, there's been a lot of focus on card. Certainly card, massive amounts of spend. I mean, the card companies oftentimes refer to themselves as payment companies. ACH has continued to see growth and development. Same thing with digital wallets and digital currencies. And so seeing ways of handling some of the more physical forms is quite interesting. And so, as you have concerns about cost, safety, usually people aren't, when you think about having employees drive cash to a bank to make a deposit or to stick cash and check in one of the overnight deposit locations on the side of the building, we think about security. That's certainly an issue. And from a treasury standpoint, liquidity, access and visibility to my available funds matters too across all of these payment domains or payment channels that exist. So quite a bit on there to look at.
Hey, one last point on that, Craig, if I may. You know, the other thing we run into quite often is a discussion about how geographic or demographic customer base as well affects these different variables. So for example, we find that in the southwest part of the US, there's quite a large cash usage versus as compared to the Northeast or the Midwest. So I think there's other elements here as the businesses we saw all the various cities and states pop up on this webinar. Every location or business is not equal either when it comes to the types of payments that consumers prefer. And that's something that I think holds true across geography as well as demographics, which we'll talk about in the slides ahead as well.
Yeah, on the cash side of the matrix, versus flexibility in cash, one says slow decline. If you look at a long period of time, there is a general decline of cash. But as we mentioned, you know, if you look back the last 5 or so years, it's increased. And that does vary by geography, but it is interesting to see how these things morph, change over time. But that brings us to some of the challenges. If we think about those, I'll start us off. You know, the check side, what are some of the challenges with, well, checks that don't clear, there's insufficient funds. Then we put some type of insurance on them, so there's a fast check cashing place. And it's been a long time since I've been stuck behind anybody who is presenting a check. And I think the last couple of times it's only been at grocery stores. And I can't really remember exactly when that is, but you hear people tell stories about it. But availability, the risk of fraudulent checks, you know, I won't talk about paper cuts, but these are hard to manage, to see. And we have processes that have converted those digitally to convert them to an ACH or scan those and present those digitally. There's certainly a number of challenges there in person, as well as how do we handle those remotely. And solutions like lock boxes and e-lock boxes that handle multiple payment methods there are helpful. One of the challenges we see in the physical side, particularly with lock boxes, is every year there are less lock boxes, there's less checks. And so there's this slowly shrinking pool of services. Now it's a long and slow trend down. You know, if you ever watch those documentaries of the shrinking pools in Africa where the wildebeest come to drink the water and the water's drying up in the hot summer days, and so it gets smaller and smaller, so the animals have to drink. I'm not sure where I'm going with all that, other than to say it becomes a smaller pie, and so, you know, lockbox sites may close, and so there's some other challenges that exist from that. So how do we handle those in an environment of multiple payment types that will exist and persist for a long time? Card is a very effective way of making payments. Fees can be high, interchange fees, chargebacks, somebody claiming they didn't have it. The level of visibility can be delayed several days, usually getting visibility to your point of sale system. And there's a range of activities that are necessary to be effective with cards too. That's just another, you know, set of challenges that each of these payment rails has. Brian, did you want to take electronic and digital wallet, or did you want me to cover any of those?
Why don't you take those, and I've got maybe some summary comments here, Craig, if you wouldn't mind.
Sure. Electronic is, you know, as we've said before, you know, ACH in the U.S. is an extremely efficient way of collecting funds when you can do it. Right? It's you need the technological infrastructure. People need to have that information. There's sometimes a validation period or a pre-note. Transaction fees tend to be, you know, fairly light, but as you have those other services, there's ways they can be costly. And so how do you solve that in store versus digital, you know, remote? I try to pay almost everything I can either through card or through an ACH debit, because from a consumer standpoint, it's quite easy. And so how do you solve those? You know, having locations, virtual terminal services, self-service portals, websites that allow you to use that as a payment method. These are ways that those are solved. And you know, digital wallets, it's funny. went to a restaurant the other day and it's like, sorry, we don't accept Apple Pay. Like they put a note there. And I know that was born from the frustration of people saying, I want to pay with Apple Pay. Well, we don't take it. And so they had 50 of those conversations probably in a week, and they put up a sign that said, we don't take it. Our POS system, all of that activity is not integrated. It may or may not be from the fees, but it's certainly not integrated in the back end. So therefore, they couldn't offer or accept a certain payment type that might be in favor from some of their, from some of the people, the diners that were coming in to eat. So there's ways of addressing each of these. That's always the case. But there's challenges, and those challenges have to be overcome. They're overcome from a user experience, from a collection experience, from a cost experience, and a fraud experience. Did you have any?
Yeah, a couple of thoughts
or?
here. I was Craig, thinking of this slide relative to my comments on the last slide about innovation over the last even 10 years. And one thing that came to mind is that we as consumers are using card and electronic because it's easier and it's everywhere, right? And whether we're here in the US or traveling abroad, we can, for most part, use our credit or debit cards at any number of global interchanges or global networks. And I think that concept of how networks have created ubiquity of a transaction that has brought this convenient payment method to the masses is something that's really important. It's important for adoption, number one. It's also important because on paper, it's lowered the cost for everybody, right? And that sort of network effect of these instruments is really powerful. Same could be said for today's P2P network. I know those are more remote payments, but the advance of Zelle versus every bank creating their own P2P network has been something that's exploded adoption with that particular method. For some of the legacy instruments, cash being probably the most pronounced, there is no network. There is no national network. Every business is really left to fend for themselves for how they get that cash into their bank, treasury bank of choice, or finding a third party to do it. And I think we can learn a lot from how networks lower the cost for all, but also incent adoption in a way that's much greater for the greater good of the business community out there. So that was something that came to mind around innovation, and we see that even happening with Pay by Bank now in terms of the advancement of that payment method through national networks.
Well, thank you. And that brings us to our second set of poll questions. We have three boxes, so those will pop up on your screen somewhere. This is another double stack. So for those who need to answer 3 questions, this is question 3 and 4, and we do have one more full slide coming up. So make sure you fill these out. The first one is multiple choice. Select which initiatives your organization has started in the last year or plans to in the next year. So 2023, 2024 to mid 2025. Bank account consolidation or rationalization, accounting system transformation, armored car, smart safe RFP, discounts for paying cash, stop taking checks, other, none of the above. And then a single choice for this question 2 here is, how do you primarily select your store's cash deposit location? Proximity or closest branch, treasury management relationship, fee competitiveness, security or risk profile of the location, other, or not applicable. Now, I know some of those are stacked together. It might be proximity and treasury management relationship, but go ahead and select what you think is the best primary method for selecting your store's cash deposit location. If you don't have any cash, you don't do that. Thanks for attending. If you're a banker, feel free to answer what you think is most appropriate. But if it's not applicable, go ahead and select not applicable and then submit. And I am told we like to keep Brian Weeks copying and calculating things. So we need 85 more responses to provide you with all the poll results after the webinar. So that's how we roll. So just 85 more times typing clip money, clip. I guess it's down to about 70 now. And then we'll go ahead and send those off. So the answers are showing up. The responses are there. That was nice and fast. Brian, Why don't you pick one that you want to comment on? I'll comment on another one on the top there. I've got some thoughts already.
Yeah, let me get through the bottom one. Well, let me start with the top. I think this concept of bank account consolidation is a really interesting one. And we see it every day in terms of um, bank branches, while in many cases being reduced or changing its remit or focus, is still incredibly important for businesses from a locational convenience standpoint. We find every day that in most cases, a business selects its bank of choice based on where it can deposit cash or where it can do its everyday banking transactions. And what's happened over time, as whether you're a small business in a particular market or region or a national business, you tend to accumulate different bank account relationships to a point where fees become quite high for those banks that you use transactionally, but not for your primary treasury account. It also becomes very complex and burdensome to your back office accounting teams because you're reconciling across, in some cases, tens or hundreds of bank accounts and banks themselves. And so we do see a push to find ways to consolidate banking relationships. And one of the big reasons this has continued to proliferate is, where do I take my cash? And so we think, and we see this every day. I'm really excited that it came out as a top one here, in addition to the accounting transformation, which actually may go hand in hand with each other. So that's very, very congruent with what we see every day.
Yeah, great comments there and thoughts on that. So, you know, the stop taking checks is another interesting thing, right? Checks have been around for a long time, and we've seen some large retailers in the news saying we're not taking checks anymore. Cash is legal tender. You know, just interesting to see how that's going to impact the business. If for the non-banked, you don't have checks, you only had cash, so that won't impact that. But what about those who love their checks and carry a checkbook around and write them? That's just curious to me. The bank account consolidation comment, this ongoing rationalization, that's number one, right, in terms of who's on the call today, what the people are planning on doing. I think that's that continual approach to how do we reduce our expense structure, make it so that we can mobilize money and do it efficiently. That's like a never-ending, I'll call it a battle. And so each of these areas of, you know, how we accept money, how we take money in, how we mobilize it, how we see it, has a factor there. So to me, that's it's not surprising that it's number one. But you know, you think about that, 38% and 32% aren't doing anything on that. So it's probably right around half of the corporations doing that. I know there's a lot of banks on here as well. And 10% armored carrier, smart, safe, RFP. So a lot of people in the domain that Clip Money is, for those who might have joined late, Clip Money is Brian's company. So yeah, I'll leave the rest of it alone too for the rest of the items. So we'll move on, Brian, and continue our dialogue. You know, this slide, I'm interested in hearing you talk through it, because as you shared information, because you're so deep into cash, some of those things open my eyes about what's actually going on across the country, not necessarily in the sphere of me being a non-cash person. I think we do like two things that deal with cash personally. And so this is just interesting to see what's going on across the US with cash. So why don't you talk through this and what this means?
Sure. This is data from a really interesting study that we pay close attention to. It's a Federal Reserve's Diary of Consumer Payment Choice, which is heavily focused towards cash usage. And because of its democratic and required nature, Craig, in terms of enabling consumers to use legal tender to make purchases. But it's telling us some really interesting things. The study was from 23 versus prior years, and some things have accelerated, some things have slowed down. The bottom line is cash is still a top 3 payment method for in-person payments. I mentioned earlier 46 payments per month for the average US consumer. of which 7 are cash-based purchases. So many of us may not be using cash. And Craig, I know you mentioned you don't use it very often, but 7 out of 46 is still sort of the average for it. However, it's remaining flat, which means as a percentage of total, it's going down, right? So this gets into the reality that says we should and can expect that cash usage over the near term, meaning 3 to 5 years, will continue to slowly decline. However, it remains something that's very important, specifically to certain demographic areas. I mentioned earlier, geographic areas. We also are finding that certain demographic, 55 years of age or older, as well as lower income households, continue to depend upon cash at a much higher percentage of their overall payments, which again, back to access and just the democratic access to cash payments remains very important for we believe all people in North America and their businesses. We've also seen cash on hand increase. This may have been a sort of pandemic-led trait, but we see about $14 more in everybody's wallet that's walking around out there. But we do see low-value purchases also be a fertile ground for cash usage. That's under $25 or less. We've seen debit start to eat into that share a little bit, but cash remains a very important transaction for lower value purchases. I think the overarching theme here, we think we may have hit a floor for cash decline just based on some of the things we're seeing. I saw a quick chat comment from John. John, I'm not sure where you were from, but you said, hey, I'm carrying more cash around because of the discounts or the surcharges that credit is starting to incur at businesses. So we think some of these trends happening, I have a colleague of mine who's in New Mexico now. He said over the past week, he's visited 9 commercial establishments who have given cash discounts if purchased in cash versus credit. So we're starting to see some interesting things happen where businesses are starting to offer consumers the ability to pay in cash because of the fees that they're incurring from a credit perspective and really providing choice of payment for those consumers. Just a few characteristics that I think we all know are really unique to cash. Number one, it's anonymous. Number two, it's ubiquitous, or at least it should be. And while there's some cities out there that are starting to require this as a requirement, we still think cash is by far the most ubiquitous payment instrument out there. And then finally, zero cost for businesses for transactions. Now, we know that it costs money to manage cash, but we still believe it's the cheapest from a per transaction or consumer-based perspective. So that's sort of what's happening in this space. The net of this is, though, this is a slowly melting iceberg, that as cash continues to be a lower form of payment as a percentage of total, the cost of it will inherently increase for everybody on this call, whether you're a bank, whether you're a business, or anywhere in between.
Yeah, thanks for that. That brings us to our final poll question. Final poll question. This is our third set. It's the 5th poll question. Well, when was the last time you updated and or reviewed your cash management strategy? Is that, and this would be formal, not just in your head, but something that identifies how your company offers to collect funds, disperse funds, or manage your cash across the board. So within a year, 1 to 2 years, 3 to 5, greater than 5 years ago, unsure. So we'll let you answer that and submit it. Couple comments. So where is this happening? John identified in New Jersey. That's Northeast state. I'm kind of curious as to why that's the case in New Jersey. I know I've been to New Jersey, and there's been some restaurants that are cash only, which seems so strange to me. That they would take only cash. But I don't know if anybody has any reasons why it might be New Jersey. But while we're waiting for those, we need 37 more people to type clip money or clip in the chat box, and we'll share all this information. It says rural Texas. I mean, rural areas seem to make a lot of sense to me for that. All right. We see the data, cash management strategy less than a year ago. So this is a pretty up to current group, 40% within a year, 63% within 2 years, and then very few 3 years or more. So this is pretty current. When you look at the broader audience, do you have a sense of, is this a much more up-to-date group than the average, Brian?
I don't know how to assess average. I would say that, clearly cash management it hasn't just become a problem in the last year. So it's been a challenge. I think possibly there's some new solutions that are coming or that are out there today that weren't even there 3 to 5 years ago. So I think hopefully we can get the flywheel of innovation going, both in terms of technology as well as business process change, so that options maybe are lower cost and options are better for the overall market. So, that's, I think, an important element, but it's great to see this audience is nearly 41% either has or is under evaluation. That's really encouraging.
Maybe we should have called it cash management tactics instead of strategy, but I think we're good. So let's move on. We have enough responses, people typing clip, so we will share the poll results with the deck as it goes out. Brian, talk to us about the business issues with cash. We covered some of the other methods, and this is an area you go deep in, so get us up to speed here.
Yeah, we talked about the challenges of the other payment methods. We wanted to maybe go a little deeper on cash specifically, and hopefully these headings resonate quite well with everybody in terms of the friction that's either has been there or is accelerating in the marketplace. We meet with a number of enterprise retailers across the U.S. and Canada, and met with the treasurer about a month ago, and he said, I started in 1992, and the way we handle cash today in 2024 is exactly the way we handled it when I started with the company, which shows us that while maybe there's some looking ahead, for the most part, businesses in many cases are using the same access points that they have over the last 20 to 30 years, and we think the time for change is now. Couple of just basic trends happening that we see. I mentioned friction earlier. I think bank branch transformation is really accelerating to a point where this has been sort of the primary area of cash deposit and consolidation or change order management for getting change to run your day-to-day business. As branches change in form and function, this transaction has become less strategic or actually non-strategic for retail banks out there today. Servicing low value, high cost transactions, we've seen some FIs report that their end-to-end cost to process cash deposits in the bank branch, whether it's at a night drop or over the counter, could be as high as $25 per transaction. So while businesses hate this transaction in a branch, so do banks. And so what we're starting to see is as access declines, we're also starting to see fee structures change quite a bit for businesses. We had a retailer tell us that their change order fee structure has doubled in the last 30 days in terms of the cost to acquire a change order in that bank branch. So accessing costs, we think, will become an increasing challenge by using those legacy methods of cash management. From a business perspective, we're also seeing, of course, labor remains a key challenge in terms of not only acquiring labor, but keeping that labor focused on and employees focused on servicing customers. Some of our clients report up to 90 minutes per day spent transporting cash to the bank branch or doing back office functions to facilitate an armored carrier in store. And so that sort of labor productivity drain is something that's just not possible going forward as we move ahead. Night drops, as I mentioned, also very challenging we talked about the velocity of cash. If we're using paper deposit slips and night drops at a bank branch, in some cases, those funds may not show up until 3 or 4 days later. So liquidity, velocity, as well as transparency for a large business or a small business, we think requires a new thinking around how we can use basic technology and portals to keep track of those deposits, not just when they're being prepared, but when they're deposited and then when they're credited to an account. And then finally, from a liquidity perspective, we talked about the importance to businesses. So these are sort of the backdrop, Craig, of what we see in terms of cash challenges. And I said earlier, as these transactions decline, we've got to find better ways and new business models to create a better cost convenience matrix that we'll talk about on the next slide.
Yeah, there's a question that popped up in the Q&A. Now might be a good time to just hear what you think about. It seems like more and more businesses are charging a surcharge to pay on credit. We already had a bit of a comment on that. Do you think this will happen more in the future?
Well, I think just from the chat, right, I think it's happening. And I think it's happening in one of two ways, either discounts for cash usage or surcharge for credit usage. In some cases, I've seen both. Gas stations, restaurants, I've seen pretty frequent discounts for cash usage for business using a carrot approach. But I've also seen at my local automotive dealer, he's very clearly saying if you use a credit card, it's 3% surcharge on the total. So I think those are methods now that some of the recent regulation around cards and interchange, it allows businesses to start making those changes in the way that they pass along those costs, which they've been incurring for decades, back to the consumer when it comes to credit.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, great. So on the solution side, solutions for cash, maybe you can talk us through some of those as well.
Yeah, we've talked quite a bit about the left side of this. We refer to this as the status quo, right? This is the current method that most businesses are using to manage their cash on a regular basis. Bank branch, whether it's over the counter inside the branch during business hours or going to a night drop, or in some cases now a card-driven ATM solution at a branch. We also have armored carriers for those couriers, for those businesses who have enough volume of cash or have enough safety requirements. Armored carrier has been the other that has serviced those business in time. I think just with general logistics and sort of the cost of labor increases, that method has become increasingly unreliable and increasingly more expensive for businesses. However, there's this huge segment, we estimate upwards of 85 to 90% of businesses across the US have not made these changes in terms of moving from the status quo. And so the great news is there is some innovation, and the innovation has been in the form of how do we move deposit collection points away from the branch closer to the store? And the first example of that is smart safes. Smart safes have been around for many years. They afford a business the ability to keep employees closer to the business. They afford, in some cases, provisional credit to give them quicker velocity of that cash next business day. But they, in time, also require quite a high capital cost for a business. Every location requires capital in the form of hardware and servicing to service that particular location's business. And so over time, this, from a cost perspective, may start to outrun some of the legacy methods of cash collection that have been there for years. And then, of course, we believe a pretty neat business innovation that's happened is how do we take a page out of this world of card networks and start to create networks of devices that can allow multiple businesses to leverage a common deposit endpoint to lower the cost for everybody of servicing common components. So instead of a single business using a single device, we have multiple businesses using a shared device. And we just know in time, and it's happened in the ATM industry with cash dispenses, this will lower the cost of transactions for everybody at a pretty impactful level.
Yeah, I think that, you know, some of the business around smart safes, for example, one of the most interesting things when those first came out, with some of the experiences with, let's say, some of the quick serve restaurants, that how much I don't want to say grease, but food items and materials get stuck in safes, and how challenging that is. But yeah, just this is an excellent chart to go through the solution sets, and like you said, the historical items on the left and the more innovative, or more recently innovative, approaches on the right to solving the challenges that exist. Brian, there's um, this matrix, this chart that has the y-axis of cost, the x-axis of convenient. Can you just talk us through what does this mean? Obviously, higher cost as you move up on the chart, greater convenience on the right. Maybe just explain how
Yeah,
you
we wanted
describe this.
to kind of profile the solutions available in the market. And I think the bottom line, and Craig gave us a little pat on the back here, while we are, of course, focused on a network of devices to lower the cost for the market, there are many cases and many instances where a smart safe would make perfect sense for a business. In high security requirements, in a business that has enough cash to benefit from it. But what we want to show here is this, we think of two very important variables, and there's probably three or four more. How do we balance cost and convenience for a business? Convenience to store staff to make sure that they're able to manage cash in a more efficient way. Convenience for back office accounting in terms of their daily administration of cash deposits. We believe the world is going to be shifting from a branch-centric service model to one that is delivered more remotely. And I think just logistically speaking, today we all can see the value of this. But how do we create optionality for your business, including the reality that there may not be one size fits all solution out there, but the ability to radically disrupt the cost curve of what's becoming an accelerating cost item on your P&L. We think the time is now to start to evaluate some of these different methods. And technology combined with physical convenient locations, we think is the way to do it, whether it's at your store with SmartSafe or in the case of a shared network, an equally convenient network, but one that's shared amongst many businesses that can really begin to rip out the cost of a daily deposit transaction for your business.
Yeah, I think it's helpful too as people look at whatever your particular situation is, and that may vary by your locations, if they're branches or their stores, how far away are banks, what's the armored car service, how much is cash. There's a whole number of variables here, and these are like the two of the dimensions: cost, convenience. There's safety. There's other factors as well that play into it, but it's helpful to organize your thinking this way. So thanks
Yeah,
for
I think just a final point on this, Craig. I think we pay a ton of attention to employee experience, which is how do we make the life of a store employee better? We realize this is a non-strategic, low-value nuisance transaction, and I think we can say that. How do we use technology and location to make their lives easier? And I think that's something that all the businesses on this phone will appreciate, because it hasn't been a great transaction experience over the last few decades. And I know we, along with other providers in the industry, are trying to change that.
Yeah. All right. So our summary slide, our final thoughts, primarily review, but a little bit more information. I'll start us off. Brian will close out with the last two. So, how do we move forward with this, especially if you're an organization that has a lot of in-store cash deposits or some of that? One is recognizing the trends. Cash is still meaningful, while it may be decreasing over time in some levels. Immediately prior to the pandemic, people are holding more cash despite newer forms of payments. And the fact that there are more payments being made, every one of us in general is making more payments. We have to think about that as a trend. And the other element of the cost for checks and cash continue to grow, and so innovative methods bear looking into when you have that. The second pillar here, or the second section to think about, is how do we identify and prioritize the challenge that we have? So there's a safety of employees and customers. There is the efficiency and the experience, or the user experience of employees, not just customers, for efficiency. And think about those areas of security, but also visibility to our cash and availability of those funds across all these different payment types. And the last sub point there about addressing secular cost trends and solve now. We see where things are going. There's a long trend in certain directions. How do we move towards more efficient methods based upon our particular organizational structure. So it's time to stay current. It's always time to stay current. Most of you clearly are, adjusting your cash management strategy, your cash management tactics, reviewing those at least every couple of years. That's the majority. So this is just more food for thought in that same vein. I'll turn it back over to you, Brian.
Yeah, just I really think the requirements for your organization is really critical as you build requirements around payments, payments priority and payments investment. And these variables apply to every payment instrument we've talked about today. And finding the right balance between where these different variables fit for your particular organization is very important. However, how do we find ways to allow your organization to invest in innovation for the future versus invest in cost for declining payment methods? And I think that's the critical balance here, is freeing up those funds and capital to go after the future while more efficiently managing sort of the flat to no growth transaction methods, and not burdening your organization to be the one that has to do it all. So we believe that there's opportunities out there for managed services that takes that burden off of your staff and transfers it to others. We've run into a number of customers who have been wonderful at starting the journey. There is no perfect one size fits all for any business, but they've started the journey, right? They've started with a certain segment of stores, a certain geography of stores, a certain dimension of stores. And then as they've grown more comfortable and learned, they've been able to grow from there. Others have said, listen, unless it's a one size fits all, I can do it everywhere day one, we're not going to start the journey. And I think there's a little bit of missed opportunity there for businesses. How can you start to reduce cost, start to reduce complexity, and allow your business to recognize those cost changes, and then over time begin to evolve the enterprise towards a common method? So solving those issues and finding the right path to start the journey is quite important.
The fact that there's complexity across this range of payment types, methods, in person, remote, those aren't shrinking, and then we have all these other changes that are happening at the same time. So the complexity isn't getting easier. How do we solve those? Worth a continual and regular look and refresh on that. So thank you, Brian. I'll turn it back over to Brian. Thank you, everyone, for joining us as we talk through this really interesting topic, especially the business to consumer world of payments. So thank you for joining. And Brian, if you take us away.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Craig. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. The CTP credits, today's webinar slides, and a recording of today's webinar will be sent to you within 5 business days. And for more on all things Treasury, be sure to check out the Treasury Update podcast by clicking the link in the chat box. Thank you, and we hope you have a good rest of the day.